I'm pleased to welcome Director Rohit Chopra to the stage for a fireside conversation. He previously served as a commissioner at the Federal Trade Commission and as director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He was on the board of the FDIC, and he continues to be a major voice on technology policy and an advocate for state and local enforcement of consumer protection and antitrust. Please give Director Chopra a warm welcome. So, well, first, thank you so much for doing this. We just heard from AG Bonta, and maybe a good way to start is to talk about the role of the states in competition policy and consumer protection as well. When you were FTC Commissioner in the minority and you were unable to get votes on certain matters, you would reportedly solicit state attorneys general who would then launch their own probes. Then in your final days as CFPB Director, you published a report that is essentially a how-to guide on how states can fill the gap of federal enforcers. A few months ago, you were named by Democratic AGs to lead work on antitrust and consumer protection and technology. I know from our experience at the Capitol Forum, we're already seeing, I think, a change in AGs in terms of their level of coordination, aggressiveness, willing to, I think, look at different issues that previously maybe we wouldn't see it happen as quickly necessarily. So we're already seeing results, but I wanted to get your sense of what you see as your primary objectives in this new arrangement.
Well, look, at the end of the day, I don't think these federal agencies, the Department of Justice or the Federal Trade Commission, they don't have a monopoly on enforcing some of these key laws that protect our markets. So, what we heard really from General Bonta, he talked quite a bit about all of the work they are doing, whether it's the Live Nation Ticketmaster matter. He talked about Tegna Nexstar. He mentioned the transaction where Paramount is attempting to purchase Warner Brothers. All of this is using a set of laws that they can enforce federal law as well. The Congress was wise to authorize states to be able to enforce many of these laws. And when you have a situation in Washington where they're either a dead fish or completely corrupt when it comes to enforcing the law, that's really making sure and solidifying the very important role of the states. I will disagree with General Bonta on one thing. He mentioned how important Hollywood is to California. Hollywood is important to the United States and the free world. The storytelling and every single lens that we get on life and human experience has shaped the way that we connect as a society. It has shaped the way speech and debate work. It has allowed people to be able to reflect the human experience in almost no other way we see in our society. So when we talk about protecting communication, media, technology, film, and television, this is not small stakes, I think, for General Bonta, but really for all of the states who have important jurisdiction when it comes to very, very large firms that operate in the United States and global economy.
You actually mentioned sometimes when you're talking about states, you also mentioned cities, states and cities. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think less understood is the fact that it used to be the market would just look at what the DOJ and the FTC or maybe the FCC was doing. I think they're now looking much more at states, but they would also be smart to look at where cities also have jurisdiction. Take actually just the state of California. The state law here actually provides for city and counties above a certain population threshold to enforce elements of state law, including elements of unfair competition and consumer abuses. We are seeing cities look at where the tools they have to protect workers, to protect consumers, and really not allow their own people and governments be ripped off by the harms of consolidation. So that is also an important set of work that is done. In the discussions we've had with many stakeholders in Hollywood, we are thinking big about the role of how cities even license movie theaters. Well, what are the different ways that they can play in structuring the future of Hollywood and entertainment in a way that preserves the best of what we have? And I think that that will continue to be, as we see a federal government that is just fundamentally not enforcing the law. I think you're going to see more and more people demand that we are not going to surrender, but we are going to use these important laws on the books to not allow us to lose what is most important about our economy and our society.
You mentioned Hollywood being particularly important to a free society, the United States. What do you see as some of the key concerns about competition in Hollywood?
Well, I look at some of the most important ingredients of why the United States actually outperformed on so many dimensions of our economy. And one of the reasons was because we did not use a kind of European playbook where you have state-affiliated companies, national champions. We wanted very decentralized markets. And we see it in our healthcare, in biotechnologies. It's not the big pharma companies that are generating a lot of discoveries, it's the small players. Lots of sectors are like that, and certainly when it comes to Hollywood, there has been constant battles against the harms of consolidation and actually, very importantly, vertical integration. In 1948, the United States filed a suit against Paramount. Paramount was the main defendant, but there were certainly other major studios that were subjected to that antitrust lawsuit. And one of the big issues was the vertical integration between the studios and the movie theaters, essentially creating exclusivities in distribution. Ultimately, it led to a set of orders that is colloquially known as the Paramount Decrees that forced the divestiture and loosened a lot of the ability to get exclusivity when it comes to distribution. And then later, of course, in 1970, as the big TV networks were exerting enormous amount of control over what got on air, we saw the Federal Communications Commission issue a set of rules and orders that I think is a really important thing to study right now, known as the FinCEN rules, financial syndicate rules, which essentially limited the ability for the big networks to have a financial interest in the content that they were airing. All of this was for the purpose of making sure that independent producers, as well as that they would have a way to succeed, but also it was an important step toward guarding against censorship and protecting free speech so that big corporate ownership was not going to get to call the shots on what kind of content was going to be seen by the public. We have lots of examples of this, and there are many more, Teddy, about where some of the business practices, consolidation, I hear, we've heard so much over the years from talent, from writers, others, about the so-called package deals, where agents use certain bundling practices. I mean, the list kind of goes on and on about where big players are able to hide information or are able to reduce the equity-like compensation, sometimes referred to as residuals in the industry, and instead be able to amass more of the gains for themselves. And I think that's really why we have to think about Hollywood, the foreign policy elements. There's so much important in this industry to stay vibrant. And I'm just not sure the business case for extreme consolidation is one that serves our people, our creators, or our country very well.
I want to talk about specific mergers now. Capital Forum recently reported that you and Connecticut AG William Tong spoke at a recent policy conference and were very clear about how merging parties should cooperate with states. We also reported that key Hollywood players attended those meetings as well. When do states have jurisdiction over mergers in the entertainment industry, and can they challenge mergers realistically without the DOJ or the FTC?
Well, my charge from the AGs is really to coordinate and really think through what our shared work will be together on a host of issues that is about consumers, market fairness. And I think what you're referring to was that we did have a discussion about the importance of guarding against anti-competitive conduct and harmful mergers. And typically, the states would work cooperatively with the FTC or the DOJ. And now there's a deep realization that was discussed that they'll need to really lead on their own, potentially without the cooperation. You heard from General Bonta, his critical comments about the settlement that was struck between the Justice Department involving the ticketing market. You're really seeing how the states are trying to really use their own legal authorities to continue on this. Now you ask, as it relates to jurisdiction. So I think it's very important for the market to understand that the corporate headquarters of a company is not necessarily dispositive of which states or localities would have jurisdiction. In many cases, a nationally operating firm, a dominant streamer, for example, may be headquartered in one state, but is certainly the dominant player in maybe every single state in the nation. So I think you are also looking at a world where it is not simply one state that is trying to protect competition or one state on the hook. It's really an all hands on deck approach. So, I will let the AGs, of course, speak for themselves, but certainly you just heard from General Bonta the work that they're doing with other states. The Live Nation Ticketmaster case is actually one that is bipartisan in nature. So, I think there are a wide range of industries where states are often prevented from engaging in certain law enforcement and regulation. For example, the federal law prohibits states from engaging in consumer protection regulation on airlines. That does not stop them from suing to block an airline merger. There are very, very few industries where the states are limited. There are parts of railroads, for example. But in general, the major industries in our economy are subject to the review of the state attorneys general when it comes to adhering to our nation's competition laws, as well as state laws that protect competition. In the challenge of the proposed merger of Kroger and Albertsons, that was also prosecuted not just in federal court, but as well as in multiple state courts as well. So there really is a number of options that our state AGs have pursued even very recently.
When it comes to the Paramount deal, a couple other issues that we've written about, there have been concerns put out about potential issues with respect to free speech and foreign ownership. What do you think about those issues?
Well, I'm not going to comment on any transaction. I will allow, I'll reference the comments from General Bonta. However, I will share that in our history, we have put into place certain prohibitions when it comes to foreign ownership and control of infrastructure businesses in our economy. There are limitations on certain regulated telecommunications firms. There are certainly restrictions when it comes to the ownership of commercial banks. And I think there has long been skepticism about foreign influence when it comes to the media. I was very involved in the investigation related to Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, the use of media platforms, technology platforms in complex statecraft. It is certainly always anyone is going to take a look and raise their eyebrows when state actors or other major foreign investors appear to be exerting a large amount of control. These are often not specifically antitrust issues, but do raise questions about who is going to call the shots when it comes to what type of stories are going to be told. You have huge worries about when there is excessive consolidation or control of media, to what extent does that become a vehicle for screening out certain types of views? And I think we have taken the view in the United States that a broad diversity of views and storytelling is part of our media environment that we should cherish, and that we should not copy and paste what we see in other regimes in the world.
And I want to talk quickly about merger settlements because that's been in the news lately, and antitrust settlements generally. In 2021, you conducted a review of merger settlements, found that the failure rate was higher than previously reported. How do you think about settlements in the context of Hollywood mergers?
Well, obviously, as General Bonta mentioned, there is always constructive discussion as it relates to certain types of, particularly when you're in litigation. Often before litigation, it can be tricky because you don't really know the full facts. I would say that we have seen certain types of settlements go badly wrong. In many cases, the empirical look back shows that they don't work out so well. I will share that I was I don't think it was proper for the Justice Department to not properly and sufficiently address the issues as it related to Disney's acquisition of 20th Century Fox. I think, I am not an expert on this, but I think many people in the industry suggest that the settlement that was crafted with divestitures did not really work. So I think you are seeing a little bit more skepticism about not just weak settlements, but can settlements actually do the trick? Do they actually cure what is really the problem? And certainly the FTC in the second Obama administration published a study, toward the end to suggest that these merger settlements actually can work, and we did a look back at that and found that either some of the information was fabricated or it was deliberately misleading. And in reality, many of those settlements, failed spectacularly.
We were talking before, though, about structural rules that prevented vertical integration and things like that. Is there anything along those lines that could work, or?
Well, I mean, I think this is part of what we've seen, and I would really put it the pandemic. The writer's strike. There has been so many moments where I think many parts of Hollywood are realizing that a different set of players need to take control to determine the future of Hollywood, and that the sort of oligarchs of Hollywood are not going to save it. And that's going to require not just thinking about what to do in one merger or what to do about one individual thing, but what is our holistic solution in terms of structuring this market so that it is producing a wide diversity of content, lots of content, and that people actually can make a living doing it. We have really seen the erosion of stability of work for so many different professions in the industry. I really want to just make sure you heard loud and clear General Banta's remarks about really thinking about workers in this. I'm really pleased that so many of guilds and unions are really thinking about the problems of vertical integration and consolidation as it is affecting Hollywood. So, I look at what was done in the Paramount decrees. I look at the FCC's 1970 rules, which, as you know, were functionally eliminated during the Clinton administration. I think about what are the types of ways in which states or the federal government could come up with a framework to help structure the market in ways that really work in the national interest, creators' interests, and the public interest. I think there are many people who see what is happening in Hollywood, and they're not seeing the spoils of their creative works being distributed in the right way. And I think ultimately that will lead many people to exit the profession. And I just don't think that that is something we should ever want. So I would like all of us to be thinking about what is that architecture, thinking about intellectual property in the age of AI, thinking about distribution, and should there be separations like we do in other industries between production and distribution? How might ownership interests, how should we be looking at that? Some of that is going to need to be done by state legislators. Some of it's going to need to be done by Congress. There are things, obviously, a functional FCC could be doing. I think all of that has to be on the table. And I will tell everyone who cares about this industry, this is a 2026 item to work on, not a 2027 item. Because I do sometimes fear the window is closing for us to really make sure that this industry is strong for the long term.
Outside of merger review, are there other practices that have caught your eye?
Well, I mentioned earlier, we have seen a changing nature of the role of financial investors in the production and ownership of a number of parts of the Hollywood value chain. Certainly you have seen growing role of private equity, hedge funds, other financially oriented investors. In some ways, the classic textbook economics thinks, well, more capital provides more liquidity, more opportunities. I don't think we've really seen a lot of those benefits. I could go much more into that, but I would say the number one thing is the extent to which there is centralization of control, excessive consolidation. All of this I would put really high on the list. But of course, I am very worried, and I will echo what he said again, about copyright protection for creators when it comes to artificial intelligence. I think he hit the nail right on the head on that.
I want to, before we wrap up, I want to ask you, you were an FTC commissioner. The current FTC chair in a Wall Street Journal profile recently said his closest allies in the White House are Stephen Miller and David Sachs. Obviously, FTC has a big role in competition and just policing, wrongdoing in the economy, unfairness in the economy. What do you think of when you read something like that about Chair Ferguson and some of the initiatives that he's been prioritizing in terms of like what that means for Hollywood?
I'll tell people a quick story. I was an FTC commissioner during the first Trump administration, and I had such a weird experience where I was really trying to find bipartisan solutions, and one of them, the White House expressed a lot of concern about issues related to Made in USA and domestic manufacturing. And I was actually quite sympathetic to some of those concerns. We had a situation that was bipartisan, a bipartisan consensus at the FTC that made in USA fraud should not be punished or penalized. From really the Clinton through the first Trump administration, it was catch and release. You would literally see them ripping off the Made in China labels, putting on a Made in USA label, and nothing. I mean, basically you paid no penalty. You did not address the harm to the competitors. The White House supported the rule changes that I sought to activate those penalties. And I thought this is something that are a rare issue that everyone can agree on. I've really taken note that the FTC is no longer enforcing the Made in USA rule. It can't possibly be ideological. Something else must be going on there. So in some ways, I don't really care what they're up to now because I've seen enough, and I've seen that our states are really the last line of defense. And our state attorneys general are prepared to vigorously enforce consumer protection laws, worker protection laws, antitrust laws, civil rights laws, and more. And we will continue to support them in building the capabilities to effectively doing that.
I have one last question. It's a little bit outside of antitrust, but we haven't written about this, but I've seen it written about elsewhere. You know, obviously, Oracle has big federal contracts with the government. There's some concerns that could be used as leverage to get influence over Paramount potentially, or play a role in concerns around freedom of speech or getting certain views put in place in the media industry. How do you think about conflicts of interest? Because I know historically, if we want to talk about history, there was a really robust conversation about conflicts of interest, concentrated power, when you have monopoly that allows for government to influence it more easily, particularly with algorithms now, that seems to be an even bigger problem. You know, Oracle has contracts, and they also own TikTok. I'm just curious how you think, or they have not owned, but they're one of the owners of TikTok. How do you see all these conflicts of interest playing?
Well, I don't want to comment on that specifically, but I'll share this when it comes to, I think what you're unearthing is to what extent will there be the ability for the government to really act independently, or is there just a total fealty or conflict of interest? It's been a year since this so-called Doge, I call it doggy. It really didn't save any money. The agency I once ran, everyone's still working there, but they've been told not to do anything. So they're actually wasting more money than ever before. What was interesting about Doggy was that the contracts that were put in place with certain third parties, there has been a lot of scrutiny about to what extent was certain types of data going to be exfiltrated and used potentially for some other private use case, or was there any access to certain types of information that could be used in private businesses, or were there certain dependencies being created? I know your publication closely covered the Department of Defense's procurement with respect to Amazon many years ago. I think that is also a real question about whether government should be procuring from companies that they essentially become completely dependent on. And what happens when there is not the ability for the public, not just to get a good deal, but do they become completely in the pocket because they are fully dependent on that firm for critical operations? That is something that obviously, when it comes to rethinking how our state works, our federal government, state governments, I think we want to make sure that there is no government contractor who can be calling the shots over the public.
Well, Director Chopra, thank you so much for doing
Of course.
this.
Thank you again.